Hey heroes, welcome to another delicious episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help determine what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. As you may be aware, in the 1970s and early 1980s, several comic book companies produced a number of advertisements for Hostess products that featured their characters and ran in various books. Marvel, of course, was a prime example of this, with the likes of Spider-Man, Captain America, and Thor shilling fruit pies and Twinkies. Many of these naturally appeared in Marvel Comics, while others were printed in books by Gold Key. The first of these, The Trap, is pretty simple. Spider-Man was swinging through the city, as he often does, when his spider sense went off, alerting him to danger. This drew him to a suspicious window where an unnamed crime boss was waiting for him with several henchmen and a super steel spider net. The wall crawler was confined in a windowless 5-foot-thick concrete cell with seemingly no hope of breaking loose. Fortunately, somewhere in his skin-tight costume, he had concealed a number of delicious Hostess fruit pies. Using these to bribe the guard into releasing him, he went after the crime boss and presumably shut down their activities. Of course, he kept at least one apple pie for himself. He went with the apple, but what flavor would you have chosen? Let me know in the comments. Personally, I'm a fan of blueberry pastries. While ads like this are clearly not meant to be taken seriously in terms of continuity, they also haven't gone completely ignored. For example, in one advertisement, a fight between the Hulk and the Abomination was interrupted by the Wendigo. We actually talked about this already in my video on the Wendigo, but the two villains joined forces to defeat the Hulk and escape. However, the Green Goliath was found by a pair of children who nursed him back to health with Hostess fruit pies. Re-energized, the Hulk launched back into battle and presumably defeated his two foes. Oh wait, they have lemon-flavored pastries in this one. That sounds pretty good. Anyway, this advertisement was also referenced in an official handbook, specifically the Wendigo's entry, although the use of any fruit pies in the Hulk's recovery goes conspicuously unmentioned. For a much more concrete example, in a later advertisement, the Human Torch took on a frosty new supervillain, Icemaster. His powers were evidently formidable, as the Torch described them as a life-stealing cold. His cold wave threatened to start a new ice age, but Johnny provided him with apple and cherry fruit pies. Icemaster warmed up to the real fruit filling and ended his attack on the city. Now, despite making his debut in such a manner, years later the villain appeared in an issue of Thunderbolts as a member of the Crimson Cowl's Masters of Evil. Icemaster has continued to make small appearances in the Marvel Universe proper since then, and has even received entries in guidebooks like the Fantastic Four volume of the Marvel Encyclopedia, as well as a later edition of the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe. The latter of which recontextualizes his encounter with the Torch somewhat by stating that when Johnny was unable to counter Icemaster's frozen powers, he instead offered friendship along with the snacks. I'd say this paints a somewhat more believable version of events, which could certainly be considered canon. Perhaps the ads could be looked at as fictionalized renditions of actual events in the Marvel Universe. This wouldn't be the first time that this has been deemed the case, as a number of books from before the Marvel Age have been regarded as such for various reasons. One example of this would be the World War II era Young Allies comics, in which the title characters were depicted as pre-teen children, whereas it's been clarified in modern canon that they were several years older at the time, with Bucky, for example, having been born in 1925. This also allows Marvel to divorce the more racially insensitive aspects of 1940s comics from continuity by clarifying things like the African-American character, Washington Jones, did not actually look like that, nor did he voluntarily go by the name Whitewash. Another noteworthy example of this kind of approach to older stories would be with Patsy Walker, the red-headed teenager who starred in a series of romantic misadventures before eventually growing up and becoming the Avenger known as Hellcat. It's been well established for a while that the books depicting her teenage years were actually fictionalized versions of her life. Within the context of the Marvel Universe, these stories were produced by her mother, Dorothy Walker, but for the full context on that, you can see my video on Patsy herself. In any event, Icemaster is probably the most notable villain to debut in a Hostess ad, but he's not the only one. In another advertisement, Spider-Man faced a villain called the Chairman, who had a gun that could transform people into chairs. In addition to dishing out a litany of seat-based puns, he sought to steal a shipment of antique chairs, so he was certainly committed to the gimmick. Fortunately, Spider-Man was aided by a pair of children who threw Hostess Twinkies snack cakes at the villain. It seems the kids had immaculate aim as one of the pre-packaged sponge cakes lodged into the chairman's gun, causing it to backfire, changing him into a chair instead. In another ad, Spider-Man encountered Ralph G. Fake, a criminal lawyer with the ability to transform into the monstrous Legal Eagle at will. Thank you, Mary Jane, for the exposition, by the way. He plotted to destroy the Bill of Rights, take over the Supreme Court, and then become the next president of the United States. I'm not entirely sure how he intended on accomplishing all of this, so it's safe to say this particular flying villain was quite mad. In any event, Spider-Man lured him in with a web hammock filled with Hostess cupcakes, and Ralph G. Fake was ultimately arrested. Another ad introduced the villainous Printout Man, who sabotaged the computer at a branch of the bank, causing the staff and customers to be frustrated and distracted by computer errors while he attempted a robbery. However, Peter Parker was in line at the time and thus was alerted by his spider sense. Slipping away and changing into Spider-Man, he followed Printout Man and stopped him as he attempted to pilfer a vault filled with Hostess cupcakes. In the end, Spider-Man passed the tasty treats out to the disgruntled patrons, and Printout Man was arrested. I will note here that Printout Man was later referenced in a S.H.I.E.L.D. email seen in 2005's New Avengers Most Wanted files, in which his name was included in a list of villains who had not made any escape attempts since their sentencing. Next, we have an ad where Mary Jane was taken captive while on vacation with Peter. Changing to Spider-Man, Peter discovered a cult being run by a man calling himself Simon the Evil Swami. Fortunately, Spider-Man was able to free the brainwashed townspeople from Simon's control by swinging over them and dropping handfuls of Hostess fruit pies. Next, we have Spider-Man vs. the Home Wrecker. His name was meant in the literal sense, as he was basically just a man who operated a crane with a wrecking ball. However, doing so required both hands, and so Spider-Man was able to stop his rampage by giving him a pair of Hostess fruit pies. One cherry and one apple. Abandoning the controls to take these, the Home Wrecker was easily captured. Next up is Photo Man. This villain wielded a camera that would immobilize his subjects, allowing him to take their valuables and escape. Coming upon one such robbery, Spider-Man confronted the crook and pretended to be caught by his camera's flash. When Photo Man tried to take the hero's valuables, he found a Hostess Twinkie cake and was so enamored with it that he practically forgot the web slinger while he started eating it. This allowed Spider-Man to easily capture his foe and leave him for the police. Next, we have a villainous martial arts expert named Jun Jitsu. The advertisement introducing this character features Spider-Man running into her while on the way home from the deli, but the fact that he recognizes her likely means that they'd already met in an earlier undocumented encounter. In any event, the scuffle ended quickly when Spider-Man distracted June with some freshly purchased Hostess Twinkies. He swiftly defeated her, but she didn't seem to mind since she got to enjoy those delicious sponge cakes. Next up, we have a fire-powered villain named Hotshot. Similar to Junjitsu, Spider-Man refers to this character as an old enemy despite debuting here in this ad. In the battle, Spidey held off Hotshot's flames with fire-resistant webbing before realizing that the villain wouldn't be able to throw fireballs and eat Hostess Twinkie cakes at the same time. Fortunately, he just so happened to be carrying enough to drop down onto his flaming foe, distracting him long enough to be defeated. Yet another foe that Spidey seemed to recognize in these ads was the Demolition Derby, a gentlemanly villain who could throw his bowler hat like a projectile weapon. It would bounce off the walls before returning to him, but naturally Spider-Man was able to distract him with Hostess Twinkies until the police arrived. Bit of an odd job there, but hats off to his performance, I suppose. Next, there was a crime boss named Larcenous Lil. Not only does her advertisement share the same name as the first one we talked about today, The Trap, it plays out pretty much exactly the same way. Spider-Man was swinging through the town when his spider sense went off, but ran headlong into a trap regardless and wound up stuck under a net. This time he bribed the goon guarding him with a Twinkie and ultimately captured Larcenous Lil. Finally, we have Spider-Man versus the human computer. This ad starts with Spider-Man searching for the villain, allegedly an evil genius with an electronic brain. Tracking the human computer to a nearby arcade, Spider-Man decided to trap his foe with a handful of Hostess cupcakes and a glass of milk. Fortunately, the human computer was still just a human beneath his costume and took the bait, leading to his defeat. Now, the reason I've brought up these batch in particular is because of a story called Jailhouse Croc. Originally released digitally as the 4th issue of the Fang 4 digital comic, it was also included in the one-shot issue collecting these stories, Fang 4 Return. For those unfamiliar, the Fang 4 is a quartet of characters from the Monster Age, including Googum, Gorgilla, Elektro, and of course, Fang Foom. The Elektro in question is not the Spider-Man villain, but a giant robot. Also, his name is spelled with a K and not a C. This Elektro actually began life as a massive supercomputer built in California by a scientist named Wilbur Poole. Poole intended on using Elektro to benefit mankind, but an accidental energy surge endowed the machine with a sinister intelligence. Hypnotizing his creator, Elektro forced Poole to build him a giant robotic body before going on a rampage in San Francisco. However, once the mind control wore off, Poole entered the robot from behind and disconnected its main power source, shutting it down once again. This machine was later acquired by Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, who reduced it in size and replaced its faulty software, wiping its evil programming in the process. This rehabilitation was successful, and Elektro even began a relationship with the FF's robotic receptionist, Roberta. Despite all of that, during a trip to the bank, he was mistaken for the similarly named villain and arrested. He was dressed up in the other Elektro's costume and brought to a section of the prison specifically made for Spider-Man foes, S-Wing. There were some there who longtime Spider-Man readers might remember, like Hypno, Hustler, and the Big Wheel. But more importantly, there was a whole host of villains who debuted in ads for Hostess products, including Legal Eagle, Hotshot, Simon the Evil Swami, Homewrecker, Photoman, Demolition Derby, June Jitsu, Larcenous Lil, and Printout Man. Oh, and Chairman was there, but even after so many years, he was still stuck as a talking chair. Elektro's frustration with the situation and his fellow inmates soon caused him to lash out, starting a brief prison riot. While it was quelled quickly, the riot was covered on the local news, where Elektro was again misidentified, this time as the robotic Spider-Man foe, the Living Brain. Fortunately, Roberta recognized her beloved Elektro and was able to have him released, chewing the warden out for the mix-up in the process. Interestingly, Elektro's entry into the official handbook of the Marvel Universe includes, in its description of these events, real names for these various villains. As it turns out, Chairman is Windsor Glastonbury, Demolition Derby is Basil Mendelsohn, Homewrecker is Matthew Mitchell, Hotshot is Abraham James, the Human Computer is Conrad Turing, June Jitsu is June Hayashi, Larcenous Lil is Lilith Mall, Photo Man is Vincent Charles, Printout Man is Windsor Babbage, and Simon the Evil Swami is Simon Saysgood. Funnily enough, while we're on the subject, Icemaster's real name was listed as unidentified in his own official handbook entry, but he was later identified as Bradley Croon. There are also instances of a character debuting in a Hostess ad, but sharing a codename of someone from an actual Marvel comic. In one instance, Spider-Man was trapped by a villain called The Fly. Naturally, he was able to escape by offering The Fly a delicious Hostess Twinkie from his utility belt, which I know that he has, but it feels weird to call it that, distracting him long enough to knock the weapon from his hand. Now, one might assume that this fly was meant to be Richard Deacon, a criminal who was transformed into a human fly by technology similar to that which turned Mac Gargan into the Scorpion. Whereas Scorpion was created by scientist Farley Stillwell, the fly experiment was performed by his brother, Harlan Stillwell. The Fly made his first appearance in 1976's Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 10, only about a month and a half before the Hostess ad featuring a character with the same name and similar costume. The following years were not kind to Richard Deacon as he slowly continued to mutate into a more disgusting fly-like form. Meanwhile, the Twinkie-loving fly, apparently a different character, was among the inmates that Elektro encountered in S-Wing, and has since been identified as Gardener Polly. This is largely a side note, but while we're on the subject, there is another human fly I do want to mention. A masked stunt performer who hid his identity, but we now know to be Canadian daredevil Rick Rojat. While he did interact with Marvel characters like Ghost Rider and the White Tiger, this human fly only ever appeared in his own book. This was because he was actually based on a real person with the same name and costume. Another Hostess ad villain who had the same name as a more notable character was Madam Web, albeit with the different spelling of Madam. In this instance, there is actually something to the core concept of the character differentiating her from Cassandra Webb or Julia Carpenter. This Madam Web was a spider-powered superhuman who was enamored with Spider-Man. When Spidey rejected her, she used her webs to block off the harbor, interrupting sea traffic and framing Spider-Man. Of course, the hero then offered her cream-filled sponge cakes in exchange for cleaning up her mess, which she agreed to. However, she did ultimately lose her Twinkies when she was arrested. Ridiculous ending aside, this is another character who could easily exist in the mainstream Marvel universe. Although as far as I can tell, this version of Madam Web has never been seen again, which is surprising given the number of Spider-Verse stories and the brief return of other Hostess villains. It should also be noted that this Madam Web debuted a full 3 years before her mainstream namesake was introduced in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. But on the topic of the Spider-Verse, there is another story that needs to be brought up when discussing the canonicity of the Marvel Hostess ads. Late for a Date printed in Spider-Verse number 1 from 2014. For those unfamiliar with the original Spider-Verse event from the comics, the premise is that a villain named Morlun and his vampiric family were hunting spider-powered heroes across the multiverse. Naturally, this included a large variety of Spider-Man variants. In this one-page story, Morlun attacked a version of Spider-Man who attempted to distract his foe with delicious golden sponge cakes. For once, however, this tactic didn't work. Being from a different universe and not bound by the same laws, Morlun killed this Spidey and fed on his life essence. Given this, it's pretty safe to assume that all of the Hostess ads we've talked about actually take place on this alternate Earth, which has been officially designated Reality 51914 as seen in the Spider-Geddon Handbook. So to tackle the question posed in the thumbnail of this video, are the Hostess advertisements canon? The answer is sort of. Yes, but with an asterisk. The multiversal clarification in Spider-Verse and the Spider-Geddon Handbook means that there is indeed a reality in which problems are solved with pre-packaged pastries, and events likely played out as presented in these one-page advertisements. However, with the presence of Icemaster and other Hostess ad villains in the mainstream universe, and references in various official guidebooks, one could infer that at least some version of the events in any given number of those ads could have happened in the prime reality, Earth 616. Of course, there is a caveat to things being referenced in handbooks, and that is that official handbooks are not gospel, and just because something is included in one doesn't mean it's permanently part of the 616 canon. For a clear advantage of this, let's look at the 2004 Punisher series, referred to now as Punisher Max. As the name suggests, this book was part of Marvel's Max Comics imprint, a line of books aimed at adult readers with more mature content. The Punisher title was initially considered to take place in the mainstream Marvel universe and was even written by Garth Ennis. He also did the previous Punisher volume as part of the Marvel Knights line, which is still considered canon to the 616. However, the events of the Punisher Max series were later clarified to have occurred in reality 200111. You can actually get an idea of when this happened by looking at the entries for the character Microchip in official handbooks. In 2004's Book of the Dead, Microchip's involvement in the events of Punisher Max are described in his profile as happening in normal continuity. However, in 2008's Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe number 7, this part of the text is moved to a note where it is clarified as having happened in an alternate reality. The point I'm making is that while books like Fang 4 and events resembling those depicted in the Icemaster cometh are considered 616 canon now, it's not set in stone necessarily. But the fact remains that any of these Hostess ad villains could potentially be canonized with a mainstream appearance, and so I'm personally hoping for the return of Chairman. For another example of characters who this has already happened to, we have the Ding-A-Ling Family. In the advertisement, through a quirk of fate, this peculiar family of criminals found themselves on the other side of a space-time warp, leading them to Asgard. Strangely formidable while working together, two cousins attempted to get the better of Thor, but were ultimately distracted by Hostess fruit pies. The Ding-A-Lings later appeared in a 2015 issue of Silver Surfer, in which they attempted to force the Surfer's ally, Don Greenwood, into an atomic shotgun wedding. Fortunately, the Surfer was able to distract them by grabbing their fruit pies, and using his powers to transform them into duplicates of the wedding ring, scattering them and causing the Ding-A-Lings to scramble to identify the real ring, while the Silver Surfer escaped with Don Greenwood. Others who have not returned include Battle Axe, an armored warrior who battled Iron Man while attempting to steal uranium before ultimately being distracted by fruit pies. Blow Dryer, a woman who wielded a supersonic hairdryer and attempted to rob a party before being defeated by the Human Torch. She was technically unnamed in the ad itself, but was identified as Blow Dryer in the Fantastic Four edition of the Marvel Encyclopedia from 2004, the appendix of which actually references a bunch of these. We have Cousin Betsy, the plant lady, and her three hench plants, Rhododendron, Artichoke, and Mary Gold. This criminal gang attempted to enlist the Hulk for a diamond heist. However, the Green Goliath attacked the plants, shaking free the valuables they had already stolen, including a variety of Hostess fruit pies. Flamethrower tried to burn down the entirety of New York City before being thwarted by the Human Torch. Conversely, Freezone was a cold-loving pilot who tried to freeze the world with a special plane. The giant flea market-eating flea was, self-explanatory, I guess. Okay, Captain Marvel using sweets as bait for a trap actually makes some degree of sense in this particular scenario. Another foe Captain Marvel faced was an enigmatic entity called the Big Mouth, and oh dear. This thing went on a rampage at a carnival but was pacified by Hostess Twinkies. Gold Digger was a villain with intangibility powers who sought to steal gold but was defeated by Mr. Fantastic. Godrun the Golden was a warrior who kept stealing gold from Asgard, however he was happy to settle for golden sponge cakes instead. Impercepto was an invisible alien who needed gold for energy, but materialized when he consumed Hostess Twinkies. Quirkagard was a villain who threatened New York's water supply with his existential depression ray. This weapon was weakened by the laughter of children, which Iron Man facilitated with Hostess Twinkies before taking the villain down with a punch. Ron Rainey, the man with 999 faces, was a retired actor who went on a crime spree while impersonating Daredevil. McBrain was a supervillain with mental powers who also clashed with Daredevil. The Ricochet Monster was an alien who could reflect any attack that battled Thor. The Roller Disco Devils terrorized the town with roller skates and loud music. Their annoying rampage caught the attention of the Hulk, who rolled them up in concrete, presumably killing them? Their defeat didn't actually involve Hostess products, but the Hulk did enjoy a celebratory fruit pie with the local children afterwards. I'd say we probably won't see them again, but if the Ding-A-Ling family can make a comeback, then anything is possible. Waterman was a supervillain with water-based powers, similar to those of Hydro Man. He battled Iron Man, but was ultimately defeated. His downfall also didn't really involve Hostess products, aside from the fact that the Flood threatened to ruin the cupcakes that Iron Man had stored in the break room, prompting him to increase the intensity of his attack. The Sorcerer's apprentices were monsters unleashed by an unseen wizard, the Sorcerer, to battle Captain America. Finally, the Twinkie Takers were a band of criminals who were obsessed with stealing Hostess Twinkies. Okay, admittedly, we're probably not going to see them again. There are, of course, more Marvel Hostess ads than we have time to touch on here, some of which involve more established villains instead of those created specifically for the advertisement. There's also an issue of Marvel Team Up in which Aunt May becomes a herald of Galactus called Golden Oldie. I bring this up because in this tale, Franklin Richards introduced the World Eater to the simple joys of golden sponge cakes. The reason we're not talking about this more right now is because while it references the ads in question, it does not take place on Earth 616 or the Hostess reality of Earth 51914. Rather, official handbooks have designated this tale as being set on Earth 8410. This story was also done after Marvel's partnership with Hostess concluded, and so the cakes in question are called Twinkles in this story, and not Twinkies. Anyway, if you want to hear more details about that story and other bizarre tales, let me know and maybe someday we'll come back to it and look at the event that it came from, Assistant Editors Month. In the meantime, that is all I have for you this week, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for an ongoing amount on any of these platforms, and you'll get your name in these special thanks, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!